They fought with tricks, you fought with logic, and that is why they lost before they even realized the battle had begun. Tricks are temporary. They rely on distraction, on misdirection, on keeping someone too disoriented to think clearly. But logic is permanent. It cuts through illusion with precision, revealing what the performance was trying to conceal. You didn't need smoke, you didn't need mirrors, you didn't need spectacle. You needed only clarity, and clarity is terrifying to those who survive on deception. They wanted you tangled in a game of confusion. You dismantled it with reasoning so sharp it left them exposed. They realized too late that cleverness built on lies cannot compete with truth backed by structure. Tricks prey on impulse. They depend on your emotions reacting faster than your mind. A manipulative word here, a staged silence there, all designed to hook you before you can pause. You broke that cycle by refusing to react without thinking. You slowed the tempo of the exchange, forcing them into a space where they had to confront reason instead of relying on performance. That patience was your weapon. While they scrambled to maintain control, you analyzed, dissected, and responded with precision. Psychology proves this. When emotion rises, logic falls. You flipped the order. You kept your emotions steady and let your logic dictate the terms. That reversal dismantled every trick they had. In relationships, tricks are often disguised as love. They use guilt to keep you close, flattery to distract you, and silence to punish you. Most fall for it because they confuse emotional noise with intimacy. But you didn't. You asked yourself the questions they never expected. What do their patterns reveal? What does their silence communicate? What motive drives this behavior? Love became clearer when you filtered it through reason instead of desperation. You learned that real affection does not require tricks. It requires consistency. You fought with logic by demanding clarity instead of illusions, and in doing so, you freed yourself from the carousel of manipulation. Friends and rivals alike will test you with tricks of their own. They throw backhanded compliments, spread rumors disguised as concern, or bait you with competition to see if you'll break. They thrive on drama because drama makes people forget the truth. You chose a different path. Instead of being dragged into their theater, you broke the script with logic. You asked for facts when they offered gossip. You demanded proof when they offered speculation. That demand made them uncomfortable because it required them to step into reality, a space they had spent their entire lives avoiding. And in that moment, they weren't just battling you. They were battling the weight of their own dishonesty. The cruelty of your approach is that logic does not argue. It exposes. Tricks need constant reinforcement, constant energy, constant feeding. Logic needs none of that. It stands alone. You didn't have to shout to win. You didn't have to perform. You simply placed truth in the room and let it suffocate the illusion. That silence, that clarity, unsettled them more than any insult could. Tricks crumble under the pressure of evidence. They wanted a battle of theatrics, but you refused to enter the stage. You dismantled them with stillness, and stillness always feels crueler than chaos. At work, this balance becomes even sharper. Colleagues who survive on politics, who rely on perception more than results, often win short-term skirmishes, but long-term logic always exposes them. Numbers, consistency, delivery, these are weapons tricks cannot defeat. You won by aligning yourself with logic rather than optics. They told stories, you produced outcomes. They fought with shadows, you brought light. That difference is why people remember you long after their noise fades. It's not charisma that lasts, it's competence. Tricks may win applause. Logic wins respect, and respect always weighs more. Psychology shows us that tricks feed on fear. Manipulators exploit insecurities because fear disables rational thought. But once you mastered your own fears, their tricks bounced off you like dull blades. You fought with logic, and logic is rooted in self-awareness. You knew your weaknesses, so they couldn't be weaponized against you. You knew your triggers, so they couldn't bait you. Self-awareness stripped their arsenal bare. They realized that every trap they set only exposed their desperation, because you never stepped into it. That is how logic becomes more than intellect. It becomes armor. They accused you of being cold because you wouldn't play their games. They called you detached because their tricks didn't rattle you. But their accusations were just projections of their own panic. What they felt as coldness was simply control. What they saw as detachment was discipline. You weren't dismissing emotion, you were mastering it. You refused to let emotion dictate the war. That balance is what unsettled them most. They expected a victim who would dance to their chaos. They met an opponent who chose clarity over frenzy. That difference turned their cleverness into weakness. The most dangerous part of your victory is that you didn't just win, you taught them. They will carry the memory of how effortlessly their tricks collapsed against your reasoning. They will remember how powerless they felt when their words failed to provoke you. That memory will haunt them because it means you showed them the limits of their control. Toxic people never forgive being outsmarted. They can't let go of those who refuse their bait because it forces them to confront their fragility. You didn't just beat them. You branded them with truth, and truth doesn't fade. Confusion is their weapon, clarity is your shield. They thrive in the fog because fog makes people stumble. If you can't see where you're going, you hesitate. You start asking for guidance, and manipulators position themselves as the only ones who can lead. Their goal has always been to drown you in contradictions. Say one thing, do another, then twist the narrative until you question your own memory. The less certain you are, the more you lean on them. But you broke that cycle the moment you chose clarity. You no longer allowed their words to define your direction. You began anchoring yourself in truth, in patterns, in facts. Confusion could only work when you were desperate for answers. Once you started creating your own, their weapon lost its edge. They will always prefer noise over silence. Confusion is noise stretched into strategy. When they bury you under explanations, when they pile half-truth upon half-truth, their goal is simple, to make you too exhausted to fight. The psychology behind this is deliberate. Cognitive overload reduces critical thinking. They repeat, distract, and overwhelm because they know most people will surrender just to escape the chaos. But clarity is the antidote. You trained yourself to pause, to strip their noise down to essentials. You asked the questions they hoped you wouldn't. What is the motive? What is consistent? What remains after the words fade? By refusing to drown in their flood, you showed them that silence and reason weigh more than all the tricks they could ever assemble. In relationships, confusion often masquerades as passion. One day they shower you with affection. The next they withdraw into cold distance. They want you chasing answers, desperate to know where you stand. That chase gives them control, because the one asking questions is the one seeking stability. But you learn to stop asking. You realized love should not feel like a riddle. By valuing consistency over intensity, you shielded yourself from the cycle of confusion. You demanded clarity, not in dramatic speeches, but in the quiet act of no longer accepting less. That decision forced them to face their own emptiness, because their power was never love, it was chaos. And once you stopped buying chaos, they had nothing left to sell. Confusion thrives in workplaces too. Leaders who fear being challenged will issue vague instructions, shift expectations, and then punish those who fail to meet the moving target. It's a tactic of control, keeping everyone guessing so nobody has the strength to rise. But you stopped playing by those rules. You sought clarity, even when clarity meant confrontation. You asked for specifics, you demanded accountability, you documented truth. Clarity became your shield in an environment designed to destabilize. And when the fog lifted, people began to see who was exploiting it. You weren't just protecting yourself. You were exposing a system that relied on confusion as fuel. That made you untouchable. Because logic carries weight in spaces where tricks eventually rot. Psychology explains why clarity unsettles manipulators. Confusion thrives because it feeds the limbic system, keeping people in fight or flight mode, reactive and unstable. Clarity activates the prefrontal cortex, the center of reasoning. By refusing to be pulled into chaos, you force them into your arena. Logic, evidence, patience. They cannot win in that arena because their strength depends on keeping you reactive. You rose above by mastering your responses, by turning pauses into power, by letting time expose what tricks tried to conceal. This is why you won without shouting. Clarity doesn't demand noise. It demands discipline. And discipline always outlasts deception. They will accuse you of being too calm, too detached. Too unemotional when you choose clarity over confusion. But those accusations are confessions. What they mean is that their weapons failed. They wanted you spiraling in doubt, obsessing over their words, replaying their contradictions. Instead, you stood firm. You forced them to face the fact that you no longer lived inside their maze. That detachment frightened them, because it proved their influence had ended. Confusion can only control those willing to stay in the fog. You walked out, and your exit was more violent than any confrontation could ever be. Clarity protects your future, because it saves you from wasting time. Every hour spent in confusion is an hour stolen from building, from growing, from becoming. That's why they love to keep you distracted. The longer you're untangling contradictions, the less you're investing in yourself. You flipped that design. You turned inward, sharpened your standards, built walls against manipulation. You learned to filter words through motive, to read patterns instead of promises. By anchoring yourself in clarity, you stopped giving away your life in fragments. That refusal is your shield, and that shield is what ensures they can never steal your time again. In love, in work, in family, the ones who use confusion as a weapon will always call clarity harsh. They will accuse you of being cold when you refuse to play along. But clarity is not cruelty, it is liberation. It frees you from emotional spirals, from endless defenses, from manipulation disguised as care. The clarity you carry now is not just a defense mechanism. It is an identity. You don't need to explain yourself in loops. You don't need to fight shadows. You don't need to waste words on what doesn't matter. You simply state truth and move. That forward momentum is the ultimate rebellion against confusion, because confusion is designed to keep you stuck. Your shield of clarity does more than protect you. It creates fear in them. They can no longer predict you, because their tricks no longer move you. They cannot measure their relevance in your reaction, because your reaction no longer belongs to them. Clarity robs them of their audience. They built their empire on smoke, and you chose air too clean for smoke to survive. Their desperation is visible now. They try harder, they grow louder, but it's useless. The louder the noise, the more obvious the void. You don't even need to fight. Clarity fights for you. It exposes what confusion tries to hide. Those who manipulate depend on chaos to hide their fragility, because chaos distracts from the cracks in their foundation. They manufacture storms not because they are powerful, but because storms blur the view. If you are too busy dodging lightning, you won't notice how shaky the ground beneath them really is. Their arguments, their games, their constant need to stir conflict are nothing more than noise designed to mask insecurity. When you step back and refuse to get lost in the swirl, you see the truth clearly. They are fragile creatures dressed in thunder. Their energy isn't strength, it's fear amplified into performance. Once you stop being mesmerized by the storm, you recognize they were never as untouchable as they wanted you to believe. They thrive on emotional spirals. If they can pull you into arguments, if they can watch you panic, if they can hear you defending yourself in circles, they feel alive. That energy keeps the spotlight off their own weakness. They don't want calm because calm exposes them. In stillness, you see their contradictions. In clarity, you notice the gaps between their words and actions. This is why chaos is their chosen weapon. It buys them time, it keeps you exhausted. It forces you to spend your strength proving what doesn't need proof. The day you refused to enter those spirals was the day you began to win. Because chaos cannot survive without participants. When you stop feeding it, it suffocates. In relationships, manipulators often create drama out of nothing. They pick fights over trivial matters, then escalate until you forget what the argument was even about. The goal isn't resolution, it's distraction. While you're caught in the battle, they secure control. You forget the original issue. Maybe their dishonesty, maybe their neglect, because you're too focused on defending yourself against a storm that never needed to exist. But once you see the pattern, you realize their chaos is a shield for fragility. They're afraid you'll see the truth of who they are, so they drown you in noise. By choosing peace, by refusing the bait, you pierce through the storm and expose the fragility they wanted to hide. That's when they panic, because your refusal to fight means they can no longer disguise their weakness. At work, fragile leaders use chaos to maintain control. They issue vague instructions, shift deadlines, or create unnecessary urgency just to keep people scrambling. While everyone is buried under stress, nobody has time to question the leader's competence. But once you slow the tempo, once you analyze patterns instead of reacting to panic, the illusion collapses. You see that the chaos isn't evidence of genius, it's evidence of poor structure. Their fragility hides in the disorder they orchestrate. Your calm dismantles it, because calm shines light on what chaos tried to blur. That is why those who manipulate fear the logical and the composed. They cannot survive in environments where clarity rules. Psychology explains this with precision. Fragile egos cannot survive scrutiny, so they create diversions. Chaos floods the brain with cortisol, reducing rational thought and increasing emotional reactivity. A manipulator knows this instinctively. They keep you in a heightened state because heightened states are easier to control. But when you master your emotions, when you resist the flood, you shift the balance. You stop being the controlled and become the observer. They cannot mask fragility once the observer sees through the fog. This is why manipulators fear people with emotional discipline. Calmness is a weapon they cannot defend against. It exposes what they worked so hard to bury. The fragility they hide is often rooted in fear of irrelevance. Manipulators need constant confirmation that they matter. If people stopped reacting to their chaos, they would be left alone with the reality of their insignificance. That emptiness terrifies them, so they stir drama to fill the void. You became a threat the moment you refused to play. Your silence reminded them that they are not as important as they think. Your indifference stripped away their illusion of control. For fragile people who depend on chaos, nothing is more terrifying than being ignored, because being ignored means being seen for what they truly are: ordinary, weak, replaceable. In love, their fragility hides beneath grand gestures and dramatic breakdowns. One day they overwhelm you with affection, the next they withdraw into icy silence. They do this not because love is unstable, but because they are. Their chaos keeps you questioning yourself, keeps you chasing validation. But you learn to detach from the storm. You realize love built on chaos is not love at all. It is fear in disguise. By demanding consistency, you expose their fragility. They could no longer hide behind mood swings and theatrics. That exposure is why they lash out harder when you refuse to bend. Fragile people will destroy the relationship before admitting they were the problem. And yet, even in their destruction, you remain untouched. Because your clarity makes their chaos irrelevant. Your authority now comes from understanding their weakness. You no longer mistake noise for power. You no longer confuse intensity for passion. You see chaos for what it really is: fragility disguised as control. That realization shifts everything. You no longer waste energy defending yourself in storms that serve no purpose. You conserve your strength for creation, for building, for battles that matter. They wanted you consumed by their fragility, enslaved by their chaos. Instead, you use their chaos as evidence, proof of their weakness. That is why you stand taller now, not because you crushed them, but because you refused to bow to storms that were never real. The cruelty of truth is that fragility cannot be hidden forever. Those who manipulate may drown others in confusion, but eventually the act collapses. The longer they orchestrate chaos, the more obvious their weakness becomes to anyone who chooses to step outside the noise. Your clarity ensures you see this collapse before anyone else. You walk away when others are still tangled, and that walk is the final victory. Fragile people cannot survive abandonment because abandonment forces them to face themselves. And facing themselves is the one thing they cannot do. A calm mind dismantles the loudest lie without speaking a word, because stillness is sharper than any accusation. They build their strength on volume, on exaggeration, on retelling the same story until others are too tired to question it. But when you sit in silence, unshaken, you become the mirror that exposes them. Lies grow wild when fed with arguments, but when faced with calm, they starve. Your refusal to flinch, your refusal to defend what doesn't need defending, reveals more than shouting ever could. They expected a clash, yet you handed them reflection. That reflection shows the cracks they hope to hide, and the quiet dismantles their entire performance. You don't fight lies with noise. You fight them by denying them oxygen. When the mind is calm, The eyes see what others miss. Their story may sound convincing, filled with urgency and drama, but your stillness allows you to catch the inconsistencies. Every unnecessary detail becomes a confession. Every change in cadence reveals insecurity. While others get pulled into the whirlwind, you watch from a higher vantage point. They sense your awareness even if you say nothing, and that alone rattles them. It unnerves someone when their noise doesn't shake you, when their frantic energy meets a wall of composure. They begin to trip over their own lies because they're not battling you. They're battling the silence you carry. Psychology confirms this. Liars overcompensate. They believe the more detail, the more repetition, the more passion they pour into their claim, the more believable it becomes. But the calm listener catches what they never expected to be heard. Your quiet mind picks up the rhythm, the cracks, the desperation. That clarity becomes your weapon. Though you never raise it, you let them bury themselves in their own words while you conserve your strength. And when the moment comes, you don't need a speech. You need only a sentence, or sometimes nothing at all, because by then, the lie has already collapsed under its own weight. In relationships, this discipline changes everything. Partners who use manipulation rely on emotional spirals to distract you. They want you over-explaining, defending, proving yourself in loops. But when you respond with calm, when you refuse to match their chaos, you expose their intent. They wanted control, not love. They wanted compliance, not partnership. Your silence reveals this. Your composure forces them to see themselves clearly, and most cannot bear that reflection. They unravel while you remain unshaken. The calm mind does not chase explanations, because it already understands the motive. That is why manipulators fear those who don't rise to bait. Their power evaporates in the presence of discipline. In friendships, lies often wear the mask of concern. They repeat rumors softly, cloak envy in compliments, and expect you to react. But when you hold yourself steady, you make them uncomfortable. You listen without giving them the reaction they crave. That absence of reaction is a verdict in itself. They realize you see through the disguise, even if you never confront them directly. Calm dismantles the lie not by shouting false, but by refusing to validate it. People who build influence on whispers cannot stand the silence of someone who refuses to echo them. You win by never stepping into their web. At work, the calm mind becomes even more dangerous. Offices often run on perception rather than truth. Those who want control spread stories, shift blame, exaggerate success. But when you hold your composure, when you wait instead of rushing to defend yourself, the lies collapse. Documentation, consistency, results. These are the quiet allies of a calm mind. You don't need to argue against falsehood when your work exposes it naturally. The louder they shout, the more desperate they look. The calmer you remain, the more credible you become. In the end, clarity is always louder than chaos. The calm mind also protects your energy. Lies are designed to drain you, to pull you into endless explanations that keep you stuck. But when you choose composure, you deny them that energy. You refuse to enter the maze. You keep your strength intact for what actually matters, your growth, your vision, your purpose. That restraint is not weakness, it is discipline. And discipline always unsettles those who feed on reaction. They grow louder trying to shake you, but their volume only exposes their desperation. You remain steady, and steady wins battles no storm can reach. Calm is not passivity, it is power disguised. Many mistake silence for submission, yet silence is often the loudest answer. It communicates confidence, it communicates certainty, it communicates control. A leader cannot thrive in front of someone who radiates those qualities. They need you flustered, defensive, chasing their words. You give them none of that. You let the silence stand as judgment. That judgment is far harsher than any accusation because it cannot be debated. They are left alone with their own noise, and in that echo, their fragility is revealed. What unsettles them most is that calm is unpredictable. They cannot measure themselves against you because you give them no reaction to feed off. They don't know if you will respond later, if you are planning something greater, or if you have already dismantled them without them realizing. That uncertainty eats at them. They expected confrontation, but you gave them indifference.